All right. What a talk. What a talk. I felt my knowledge of and inspiration of AI got 2x, and I freaking use this stuff every day as a writer and a storyteller. That was amazing. Okay, well, as we get set up for our next talk, go right into it. Just remember that we always have snacks here. It's just cookies now. There's some coffee, some juice. Help yourself. Grab a seat. It's comfortable. We're in air conditioning. It's hot outside, but it's cool in here. All right. Looks like we're ready. Okay, we're going to our next talk. We're going to do developing the world's first virtual asset-specific regulations in partnership with VARA. We have our two speakers, Kristi Swartz and Amar Fahmy. Take the stage.
Let's see. Here we go. Good afternoon, Dubai. After that session is really high energy. Hopefully we can keep it up. As they said, come in. I'm sure they've got also the best coffee and the best cookies in town. So there you go. Thank you very much for joining our talk this afternoon, developing the world's first virtual asset-specific regulations with VARA, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority. My name is Kristi Swartz. My colleague Amar Fahmy. We're those self-professed cool kids of DLA Piper. We're an international law firm. We've worked the last 2 years with VARA on these regulations, and quite frankly, it's a project I'm very proud to have been a part of, and I wish to thank all of you for taking interest in some of the things that we have experienced and coming to this panel today. I think before we basically get started, I think Amar is going to basically set us up a bit and tell us kind of where we started at when we started on this journey of drafting these incredible laws, regulations, and rule books. And now we've actually even been working on updates to these to keep in touch and keep up with the regulations and the actually industry as a whole. So Amar, maybe you can set the stage for us.
Thank you, Kristi. Yeah, so it's April 2022. We've just been instructed by VARA. The price of Bitcoin is $45,000 US. Terra Luna is a popular stable coin. 3AC hold 10 billion worth of AUM. And FTX is one of the largest exchanges in the world.
Next slide. So just a little bit about what VARA and they're basically the principles and objectives. I mean, I think it's without saying the empowering innovation through responsible regulation of the virtual assets industry would be a key point there. Before we get to kind of the key objectives and maybe where we think what VARA represents and what the objectives are and for the Emirate of Dubai, maybe we can tell you a little bit about the process that we went through, because a lot of people come to me and say, Kristi, how in the world do you write virtual asset laws or laws that have never been in existence before? And the reason we've got a blank sheet of paper versus a stack of books here, it's because we were literally given a blank sheet of paper by VARA. Now, there were some high expectations, no doubt. This had to be of the highest quality and standard. Gold standard, in fact, was the mandate. But in fact, it was a blank sheet of paper that we were given that said, we've kind of only got really 2 sets of obligations or requirements. One, it must be regulation that enables there to be consumer protection and also compliance with FATF obligations, and that's a non-negotiable. Other than that, you can imagine as lawyers, we are precedent-based. We basically look at other things just to make the laws, or in fact, we kind of criticize other laws after they've already been made, because that's super easy or a lot simpler than trying to come up with the law. So when we basically were asked to do this, I can say our colleagues from 3 different jurisdictions. I'm in Hong Kong normally, Amar's here in Dubai, and we also had our US colleagues and our UK colleagues also working on this project to be able to give a very clear understanding of what the world was trying to do, I think, at that time. Because as Amar rightly said, this was a different place even just a year ago. So if we look back at that blank sheet of paper and we start to say, hey, what are we trying to do here? You know, if you tell me we have a blank sheet of paper, I'm really excited about that. Why? Because you can color on it, you can cut it, you can fold it, you can do a lot of things with a blank sheet of paper. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues even said, oh my gosh, this is an undaunting task. I'm not really sure I like this blank sheet of paper. Why don't you tell us how you want these things done, and then we'll do it. Luckily, those of us who stayed on the project long enough, we came to rise to the occasion, and we did a quite successful job at trying to figure out how we were going to look at this. Now, what we've got up here now is this benchmarking. We went across the world. In fact, we looked at 20 different jurisdictions to look at a set of specific facts about what some people were doing, kind of what I call the good, the bad, the ugly. Some people were doing some things that are really interesting, MICA, FCA, trying to get on TAC. We've also got Hong Kong and Singapore, of course, I mean, more in the area where I'm usually at, looking to do things in that specific space. And then we had places like the US, and I have to say with the US, we looked at it, and sometimes we looked at maybe what people were doing probably in a good way, but we also looked to say, what are things that we could probably improve upon, and what are the things that we could basically look to do better or improve? The difficulty with writing law in this space is that technology, the world is going to move a lot quicker than the law. It's a reactionary. Law is always going to be reactionary in its application. Lawmakers and lawyers don't go out to write laws in hopes that something may happen and it will capture that. It's usually as a result of something that has happened in FTX and the like, or something else that's caused some sort of consumer protection issue. So we basically looked across the team at DLA, and we identified all these things that we could be doing. And then we basically looked at how are we going to figure out what to do on that blank sheet of paper. So maybe the next slide.
Yeah, so just checking back into the market. It's now mid-June 2022. Bitcoin price is less than half of what it was before at 19,000. In the months of May and June, we saw the collapse of the Terra ecosystem, causing knock-on effects into the industry, arguably two of the most turbulent months in the crypto industry's history. I mean, whilst that's going on, obviously, it just reinforces the need for there to be regulation in this space. So whilst it seemed like everything was collapsing around us, we were actually gaining wind in our sails, so to speak, in terms of the need to do the work that we were doing.
Right, so I'll challenge everyone to look at this for a little bit and then maybe figure out where I'm trying to go with this, because this is my quintessential, I think, slide that sums up how we put things together and really the buckets that we looked at. This is what I call the animal, vegetable, mineral page, and the reason why we basically look at this is kind of the saying, it's by creating the regulations, we learned some lessons from this benchmarking of these 20 different jurisdictions. And one of the things we came into being, and one of the things that became obvious and relevant, is the fact that, for instance, if we take some jurisdictions, a lot of jurisdictions were trying to kind of pigeonhole, define, or put things in a certain way in certain categories. The problem with this industry, if you try to do that, as soon as a definition becomes irrelevant or you fall out, technology moves on, the definition is no longer relevant and you're no longer catching the things probably that you really meant to catch. This is an industry, for instance, I've been in this space for quite a long time, and it's an industry that actually was craving to have regulation, which is a very interesting thing. In Hong Kong, normally we would say we don't want to be regulated, don't worry about it. But I think this is a process of coming of age with this type of technology, that everyone was actually craving regulation or some regulatory certainty about what was going to be permitted and what was not going to be permitted. So when we looked at this animal, vegetable, mineral category, we looked at, and luckily we had a little bit of guidance. I say we didn't have a lot of, we had high expectations, maybe slightly less expectations or guidance on where they wanted to go. But law number 4 of 2022, which actually set up and established VARA, gave us some help, because as many of you know that have been in the Emirate, law number 4 says all virtual assets are regulated. So guess what? We didn't have to basically splice and dice the animal, vegetable, mineral and say, are we a commodity? Are we a security? What is this that we're dealing with? So law number 4, in my opinion, actually leapfrogged Dubai and the Emirate of Dubai ahead of a lot of other jurisdictions, because we didn't have to have this whole discussion around, do we think we're a security and do security laws apply? Because that was actually not relevant. What was relevant is that we basically said it's regulated, but can we look at it from a light touch regulation, or do we basically look at it maybe in the exchange space a little bit more heavy, more stringent? You're holding client assets. There's also a lot more consumer protection issues at hand. So that's what I call the animal, vegetable, mineral moment, when we basically could say, we don't have to think about all these things. It was quite nice because we basically could sit there and say, let's focus on the asset. Let's focus on not the product. Let's not focus on a definition. Let's focus on an activity of what this virtual asset and its journey can do and what it might be going forward in that process. So now I'm going to hand over to Amar to basically finish up.
Yeah, thank you, Kristi. So if you're not defining assets, what are you defining? You need to put some parameters around it. And as Kristi said, if you take the principle that these are assets, they're of value no matter what, and that's what Dubai Law Number 4 defines, then it's actually the activities that are being carried out by the intermediaries in the space. You're taking responsibility for something that's a thing of value to somebody else. So we define, and there's currently 8 virtual asset activities, and those are the parameters of where the regulations are drawn. So some of those activities include custody. If you take custody for someone else's assets, some include broker-dealer services, VA management and investment advisory. So are still familiar with people that come from a traditional finance background, but as I say, if you work on the principle that all virtual assets are of value, then you need to regulate the intermediaries that perform that role. But so then there's one thing in terms of, well, how do you, or the rules that you're going to write. We also needed to consider the form and the regulations that will take, and it was a clear direction from VARA that they needed to be easy to use. So this is actually one of my favorite parts of the story. So we had a couple of different layouts that we had in mind. Put it in one document, put it in separate documents, put it all over the place. And we had discussions internally and with VARA. Oh, I've gone back. So we scheduled a meeting with VARA and the leadership, and we literally printed out the 2 different forms, because sometimes until you can see it and touch it, you actually don't see what the different options are and which has the benefit. And so this is actually to reflect the staples. There were a lot of staples on that desk that day with a lot of paper, but we recycled the paper, so it's all good. But where did we end up? Well, we ended up in a position which I hope is easy to use, has received some good feedback so far. And that is, the structure of the rule books is that you have 4 compulsory rule books. So they apply no matter what virtual asset activity you're doing. And they cover fundamental areas that the regulations needed to cover. So things like corporate structure in the company rulebook, compliance and risk management, technology, of course, and then market conduct. There'll be familiar bits in terms of like market operations and other things. And then a way in which we hope we've introduced proportionality is different activities carry different risks and need to be regulated in different ways. So each activity that you have then has a separate rulebook that has rules which apply in addition to the compulsory rulebook. So if you're doing one of the activities, you only need to worry about one of those rulebooks in addition to the company rulebook, in the compulsory rulebooks. Or if you're doing more than one, you can pick those up. But this was the exercise we were doing of, I want to be a broker-dealer and exchange, I need to look at these, I don't have to worry about those. And that's where we hope the usability comes from. It serves so far to be a very flexible mechanism. And an example of that is earlier in the year, we updated the custody services rulebook to include provision for custody service providers to be able to offer staking as a service as part of their business. And we were able to do that by just looking at the custody services rulebook, updating that, and it didn't impact anything else. So let's check in on the market again, because we're now in November 2022. And I think we all know what happened in November 22, hence why, the price of Bitcoin picked up a little bit in that time, but is back down at I think that's essentially market lows. Now, obviously, there's no accounting for criminal activity, which are obviously the allegations in the FTX case. But again, talking about the wind in our sails, by this point, we had more stress tests to test our draft regulations against, and FTX was a perfect example of sort of the market even crying out more for the need for regulation. But so the next stage was, once it works, so another fundamental objective of VARA, and the reason why it's set up, is also to facilitate developing the ecosystem. It talks about working in partnership with the industry to form its regulations. So going out to industry consultation was crucial before we went into market. We needed to get more insight from the industry, from the people who are there day to day doing these activities that we're talking about regulating. So again, with the backdrop of everything that was happening in the FTX case in November, we then arranged a series of industry consultations over the week in November, to then discuss in detail some of the activities. And I genuinely have to say that the outcome of those consultations and the input that we got from the industry really took the regulations and refined them in fundamental ways that made them market ready. It's really what sort of made the difference between what we thought were good and served to be good and served as validation in certain ways, but there were a couple of features which we were still discussing internally, which I think going to industry and getting their feedback, as I say, really finessed. So that was November. After many more long days in the office, late nights, my parents came to visit in January for a holiday in Dubai. I didn't really see them much because at the start of February we published the rulebooks, the first version, to what was quite well received at the time. And been to a few discussions here. Was on a panel yesterday around adoption, and I think there's a recognition that clear regulation is fundamental to the technology and this technology that we're all devoting our careers to really gaining adoption and reaching its potential. And so we hope that certainly in the Dubai market, we've done our little bit to help facilitate that. There's a lot more to do, and the tech guys perform a much more important role. But we hope it's a good start nonetheless.
So thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your interest. VARA obviously has a stand here, I think, straight and to the right. Amar and I will be around for any questions that you might have, but thank you very much.
Thank you.